Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced he will establish a National Water Crisis Committee, which he will chair to tackle the country's ongoing water crisis. The establishment of the committee, which he likened to the one that tackled load shedding, comes amid water outages in Gauteng and other parts of the country, particularly in the city of Johannesburg, where residents took to the streets to protest for the outages. For more on this, we're joined by Jonathan Erasmus from WaterCAN, as well as Ravin Singh from the Johannesburg Water Crisis Committee. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen, this evening. I want to start with you, Ravin. We know that the water crisis has been looming for many years now, but we also see pockets of protests and residents in Johannesburg complaining about prolonged water outages. But just give us a picture of what this situation is looking like in Johannesburg.
Okay, you're asking me the question at the very wrong time because water has just returned to my house. So if you looked at my mood this morning, it was much worse than it is now. But on a serious note, it is a very difficult situation, especially so for the elderly, especially so for other people who are vulnerable, including people with disabilities. We've been relying on water tankers for 9 days. It is not as bad in my area as it is in other parts of Johannesburg. But what I'm quite heartened by is that people came out in their numbers and exercised their democratic right to protest. And I think that would make the founding parents of our constitution very proud of our people, that they are pushing the provisions of our constitution, the demands for access to water, and exercising that right through protests. So I think that's amongst all these tragic circumstances, that is very heartening. But it's also heartening that the authorities are starting to respond. It's not everything we want, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Talk to us about, geographically in Johannesburg, how many of these communities are experiencing these water outages?
Okay, I'll speak for Johannesburg East. In Johannesburg East, it would cover the areas like Yeoville, Bertrams, West Valley, Kensington, Cyril Dean, Observatory. Jonathan perhaps will have a better scan of other areas, and then perhaps he should come in at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, the issues, I want us to stick first on Johannesburg. The issues that Johannesburg is facing are mostly blamed on infrastructure, but some may say the budget is too low to keep up with the rate at which this infrastructure must be maintained.
Yeah, so it's both a matter of maintenance. It's also a matter of new infrastructure, because our population has grown by more than 80% since 1994, 1995. So yes, it will be maintenance of old infrastructure, but also about rolling out new infrastructure to cope with demand and a growing population. Now, right now in Johannesburg, what we understand is that funds raised by Joburg Water through the sales of water to people, the surpluses from that is not reinvested in the infrastructure. That money is swept into Johannesburg's broader expenses, broader accounts, to pay for the expenses of other entities and running costs for the city of Johannesburg. So the focus on water is not what it should be. And the city cannot keep up with both demand for new infrastructure and maintenance of old infrastructure. Now, we've heard from various sources, including the mayor, including statements from National, that the sweeping arrangement will come to an end by the middle of the year. We hope that comes to fruition and that there's renewed focus on spending. We've also heard from the president in the State of the Nation, I think something to the tune of 53 or 56 billion will serve as incentives for metro municipalities to improve their infrastructure spend on water.
Yeah.
But
John,
what we would want is if this money is made available, we would want bang for the buck. We don't want another COVID situation where money was looted. We want money to really be spent in addressing the backlogs and in rolling out new infrastructure.
yeah, Jonathan, and Joburg is seen as, a municipality that consumes more water than is actually allocated. But like, we've just spoken with Ravin about issues of maintenance, it seems the amount of water that is coming in does not have the necessary infrastructure to carry it.
Yeah. So one of the big issues that we really have, and I think it's important to put it into context, is there's a failure throughout the system. It's abstraction, it's treatment, it's pumping, it's storage, it's distribution. And each of those in our current framework of how we manage water in this country are managed by different people along the way. So everyone's got to play a role. Once again, you can even look at it in a more simplistic way. You've got local government, often is required for the water service, providing the water services. You've got the bulk water supply, like the water board, like Rand Water, Umgeni Water, and KZN. They kind of do the bulk infrastructure to get the water there. And then you've also got your provincial national government that has to provide this oversight function. And this is critical, this oversight function that they've got to provide. What we've actually witnessed is a failure throughout that system. You see, at each point, there's a break. So you've got this incredible story in Johannesburg, or Gauteng, for instance, where you've got outages, and I think you were asking Ravin about other areas. The issue, it's not about it's all of Johannesburg has got issues. It really depends on where you are and how or low-lying area. But at the same point, you've got more than sufficient water reserves sitting in the dams. The water's there. We just can't seem to get it to the tap, where you and I and everyone else who's watching this, where we have our first experience of water delivery. It's our last, in fact, the first and last at the same point. And when it's not there, we're really not aware of the chain of events that have happened to get to this point. But we've got to realize that, it's a systemic failure throughout.
Yeah, you speak about systemic failure, and we know that the National Treasury is in fact offering incentives, right? But on condition that there is a turnaround plan on issues like water utilities and ring fencing water utilities revenue. Johannesburg seems to have this plan, but the issue is with implementation.
And it's not just implementation. It's about, well, it is actually, it's all about implementation, I guess, but it's also about the follow through. We are unable to just, what we're seeing right now in the city is the plugging of holes. We got leaks all over the place. And instead of having this kind of long-term picture of where we want to go, all we're doing is to kind of quote those cartoons you used to see as a child, the guy just sticks his hand in all the little holes so the water doesn't breach through the dam. That's the scenario that we've actually got. And when you're doing that, you can't really focus on the long term. So yes, these incentives are good, absolutely necessary, and they must come through with a host of conditions tied to them. Look, it's not like we don't have similar incentives anyway in terms of conditional grants and all that. And they too have incentives. I just don't think they've been properly kind of followed up through. I think the Treasury probably dropped the ball on a lot of this. So we've just got to make sure that we're much more rigorous in making sure everyone meets their targets before the next tranche of funding is released.
Yeah, Ravin, Jonathan speaks about systemic failures, and we know that when there isn't water, there needs to be alternatives. People shouldn't have to go to the streets, protest for a basic human right. There should be water tankers, but it seems residents are even complaining about the availability of even water tankers to relieve them.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. We have a principled position that water tankers is not the ideal situation, but in times of crisis like this, they need to be made available. But we've also heard instances of where people who own water tankers, or what people conventionally refer to as the water mafia, and I don't want to generalize that all owners are part of a water mafia, but elements of those who are involved in sabotaging infrastructure so that they could profit from water tankers. What we heard this week from the Department of Water and Sanitation, from the Minister and the Deputy Minister, is that they are directing municipalities to insource these and not for them to procure services from outside of the municipality. So that's useful. Now, you're caught in a situation, I think Jonathan pointed to that, of the little Dutch boy who goes around putting his fingers in the reservoirs when there are multiple leaks to try to stop losing all the water. It was the dikes, rather. It's the same. Should we be spending all our resources getting more water tankers, or should we focus on fixing the leaks, on fixing the reservoirs? So it's a difficult situation. What we managed to do in our area relatively successfully over the last 9 days, through better communication with Joburg Water and with liaison with residents, was to direct water tankers to where they were needed most. We're not saying that we reached everyone, but we found it far easier this year than it was last year this time during the heat wave, and people were unable to get adequate supply. Yeah, so it is a very difficult situation. The ideal would be to fix the water system and only requiring water tankers when you have emergencies, but it can't be emergencies on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I mean, fixing the issues may take a while, right? While it's not an ideal situation, but water tankers need to come in. Talk to us about what alternatives there are, other alternatives for Joburg residents. You know, I usually stop at the garage and you'd see during this crisis people running to the petrol stations to buy bottles of water. But for those who don't have the means, what other alternatives do they have?
Well, there are not many alternatives. There are people who have neighborhood who have boreholes on their properties. You know, we see the best of humanity and the worst of humanity during the crisis. We hear of people paying off drivers of these tankers to come and fill their water tanks. And on the other hand, we hear of people who make their boreholes available to the community for people to come and collect water. So we've heard of plans of sinking boreholes at schools. We've heard of plans of sinking boreholes next to the universities. We've heard about as the fix happens, so the installation of the large metal tanks that you see usually at malls and other places where people congregate. Those are the alternatives people have. And sadly, I mean, I live close to Best Park. I live close to Rhodes Park. We live close to where the Yuxke River starts, or the stream rather, and we see people collecting water from there. Yeah. It's dangerous, untreated water. We've heard of people collecting water from the lake in Rhodes Park. So the alternatives are not many.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I mean, while we speak about issues of infrastructure, we know that in some areas this has been also exacerbated by, you know, climate change issues. In the most recent past, we saw, you know, floods ravaging areas like Limpopo. But also, if you remember, the KwaZulu-Natal province has also been on the receiving front of issues of climate change. How much of a problem does climate change pose to the already damaged infrastructure that South Africa has?
Yeah, thank you. What we certainly don't want to do is diminish the impact of climate change. I mean, it plays a huge role in pretty much everything, and in fact should be the cornerstone of all our future planning of how we create these the National Water Resource and Infrastructure Agency, for one, how we finalize the Water Service Amendment Bill, which is all meant to kind of help us manage water as a country going forward. So climate change plays a huge role. I don't think we can ever get rid of that part. What we're saying is that is an element that possibly we obviously cannot control, but we can try and do our best to manage how we roll out infrastructure and how we approach using water. But what is in our control is making sure our systems are working. There was a clip that came on before the show about the issues of water on the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal. Now, they've had those water issues since 2011. You know, that's over a decade-old problem. That's never really been a problem, and that effectively comes down to systems management. If you ever go down there, you'll notice most houses, almost every establishment, has full on JoJo tanks throughout, and most of those houses can go without water for up to several weeks now. They've become very used to it. What we don't want to see is that kind of thing now becoming very relevant to the city of Johannesburg, which is obviously doesn't get as much rainfall as the KZN and as the South Coast. And that's why it's important to get this right. You know, people making their boreholes available. It's incredibly heartwarming and very kind. But we've also got to manage our underwater resources too. So there's a huge amount of management that needs to take place. And if there's one thing that as a country that will pull us together, it's a scarcity of water, or will divide us permanently, quite frankly. I mean, we can all make a plan with the electricity, but water is the cornerstone of all life, and we've really got to guard it, and we've got to make sure that the correct decisions are made along the way to make sure not only we have water, but future generations too.
Gentlemen, I want you to hang 10 while we take a quick ad break. This is a very, very important conversation, one that we'll be having for many, many days to come. So I want us to take a quick ad break. More of this conversation when we come back. Welcome back, and thank you for choosing to stay with us. We're still having an important conversation about South Africa's water woes, and I'm still joined by Jonathan Erasmus from WaterCAN, as well as Ravin Singh from the Johannesburg Water Crisis Committee. Gentlemen, thank you very much for staying on. And I want to come back to you, Ravin. I mean, you spoke earlier about a growing population, which means that there will be growing consumption. But obviously, there are also structural issues that are hampering the supply of water in South Africa. When we look at, for example, the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, that is also late. Talk to us about, on the ground, how these issues are affecting the ordinary South African.
Okay, we know that Rand Water regulates the amount of water it supplies to each municipality. It will be in a position to increase supply when the project is completed in 2028, 2029. Whilst that may be important, we, as Jonathan indicated earlier, climate change affects us in South Africa. We live in a water-scarce country. We live in a water-scarce province, a water-scarce city. And the way we use water in Johannesburg, it's about 300 liters per person. The global average, I think, Jonathan may know better, but I think it's about 170. And we could do better to cut consumption in Johannesburg. However, it's very difficult to call on residents to cut consumption when you see leaks on the road. And people, the message does not land. People say, look, water's being wasted on the road. Why are you asking me to save? But we have to find a balance. We have to find a way the message can land so that people can change their behavior with water. You know, you could have a 3-minute shower and be just as clean as having a 10-minute shower. The other 7 minutes is a luxury. And we should be changing people's behavior in that regard. So yes, as much as we have the systems problem, as much as we have the ailing infrastructure, we have failing infrastructure, and we have needs for new infrastructure, we have to change our relationship with water.
Yeah, and the president during his State of the Nation address announced that there will be a National Water Crisis Committee, which he will chair. He likens this committee to that one that dealt with, the woes at Eskom. Do you think the middle or the missing part about this announcement is the issue of accountability? We seem to be moving, to let's just fix the problem and forget about what caused the problem to begin with.
Yeah. So I think somewhere in the president's speech, he made reference to the charging of municipal managers for failing in exercising their duties. I think to some extent there's accountability there. I think that the water boards, the board of Joburg Water should be held accountable for their performance. But whilst that is happening, we can't be entirely focused on that. We need to focus on rolling out new infrastructure, getting the fix done. But as we do it, there must be both national and very localized accountability measures. So what do I mean by this? So if they are fixing Alexander Park Reservoir, the local residents need to understand the entire plan, the cost of it, the duration of each phase, who the contractor is, when the contractor is being paid, and all of these details, so that this is public knowledge and the timelines and the deliverables are all public so that people can be held accountable for the build. So there's going to be many of these projects throughout the country as infrastructure is rolled out, and accountability must happen at localized level, not just in terms of how the money is spent, but also in terms of the outputs and outcomes, in terms of quality, in terms of reach, and so on.
Yeah, and Jonathan, the question, or rather the context around the question of accountability was perhaps looked or structured in a way where I wanted to find out, essentially, looking at South Africa's rate in holding people accountable, are we even likely to see there being accountability? We've had commissions and we're still waiting on prosecutions. And here we're talking about holding municipal managers accountable. Are we going to put as much energy into holding people accountable as resolving the issues?
Well, I think you've sat in that chair long enough to realize that generally is not something that happens. Accountability is very poor in this country. In fact, it's one of our worst scores, I think, if we had to score ourselves on pretty much everything. And that is always going to be the underlying issue of this. You can have policy change, you can have new legislation, you can set up special committees, but if people don't have consequence, well, then it doesn't really amount to anything. And that's the way the world drives. The world moves forward when there's consequence for your actions. From just running a small business and if you run it really poorly, there's consequence. But the problem is when you're in the States, if you run it really poorly, there is no real consequence. And I think Ravin was touching on this earlier. It comes down to the lack of transparency that we see, certainly within the state, specifically with projects that are rolling out and specifically with milestones being reached. And importantly, what we are not seeing are things that, well, we know that every single official in every single government institution has a performance scorecard. They are getting their bonuses at the end of every year, usually based on that. So at the very least, we should be re-looking at specifically how our senior managers are viewed. I do believe there should be a lot more transparency on how they proceed with their work. I think in the municipal structures, we call them Section 57 employees. They come in, they're obviously very senior, and they need to have a much more rigorous oversight of their milestones being reached and being reprimanded for not meeting their targets. You look at you brought up eThekwini a bit earlier about climate change. eThekwini's got a horrific wastewater treatment problem. Almost every single wastewater treatment plant in the entire city is broken. And the city's own data shows us, and it's been like that for the last 5 years at the very least. Yet we haven't seen any wholesale changes at the top structure of the city's water and sanitation. And that's serious. Why not? There should be some kind of accountability, and we're not seeing that. So we really do need a complete rethink of how we view government and how we view the work that they do.
Yeah, and I want to stay with you, Jonathan, because I want us to talk about, the work that will go or will be done by this National Water Crisis Committee. The team will consist of experts, and one wonders what kind of strategy will be implemented here. And when you think of Eskom, you already think about, planned, outages to maintain the infrastructure, which ultimately for Eskom yielded results. For water, which is a basic human right, very, very important for survival. How do you think this committee will go about, fixing the issues that we have?
So we are fortunate that there are a lot of very smart people that do sit in the Department of Water and Sanitation and a number of other agencies. I mean, we can't get away that there are a lot of forward-thinking people that sit there. And I do believe a lot of their focus is going to be about securing the future, because that's where even though we've got this immediate crisis in towns and villages and cities across the country of pipes bursting and all that, what we also got to look ahead to is making sure we get enough bulk water into the system The Lesotho Highlands project, for instance, is 9 years behind schedule. And this is serious, that because your population growth is starting to outstrip your supply. We've seen this in eThekwini as well. It's going to have or in KwaZulu-Natal. This is going to be a very real problem in the next 2 to 3 years where demand is going to start outstripping supply. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that. And then, of course, there's going to be focus on hitting areas that are in dire need. I would imagine metros would be high on the agenda because they're economic drivers. Get your economic drivers working first, get them creating wealth, capital, and everything that gets your economy going, and then start moving towards the smaller municipalities. One of the things that is on the cards, and this is important to remember, is there's a white paper on local government, and there's a real reimagining taking place of local government. So at the moment, within the local government structure, what you normally have is in certain provinces, local municipalities do the water, and others, water boards do, and other provinces, district municipalities do. This leads to a very confusing system of who is responsible for what. So I do think there's going to be a lot of alignment taking place within that kind of space of lines of responsibility and who owns it, to who owns the infrastructure per se. So I do think that's going to be another serious focus point that's going to take place. And then lastly, and I think Ravin touched on this, it's about the cultural change, education. What's our relationship with water? The number he was referring to earlier, I think the global average is about 150 liters per person per day. South Africa is at about 256. It's a bit nuanced because it does include some industrial usage as well, but still very high, no matter how one skins it. And we've got to get that kind of mean average down. That's going to be a big thing. And that is really a behavior issue.
Yeah. Ravin, 10 seconds, key priority places that need to be attended by this water committee for a municipality as big as Johannesburg.
I think the starting point would be getting the right people on board. I think our universities, which the states fund, and I think Jonathan pointed to that to a large extent, there is technical expertise in South Africa, both within the Department of Water and Sanitation, in Joburg Water, and it's an opportunity to ensure that we can build state capacity. It's a nice problem to fix, so we can build state capacity at the same time. We must ensure that inclusion, we can get large amounts of people to work in public projects like water lines and so on. It's an opportunity to do that. The private sector should be involved, and you can't run away from that. It must be very strictly regulated, and there must be transparency. It's very difficult for the public sector to corrupt the public sector. It takes two to tango. The private sector involvement often leads to that. So yes, we need to have the right level of transparency and regulations to ensure that we get bang for our buck.
Ravin Singh is with the Johannesburg Water Crisis Committee, while Jonathan Erasmus is with WaterCAN. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen, this evening. That is our panel of guests reflecting on South Africa's water woes and what they make of the president's announcement to announce or to appoint a national water crisis committee, which he'll be shared. Quite a number of points shared about, the key priorities that need to be attended to urgently. But